but it's kind of the joke because I said to him, well, why would you sign me up for that? Because I don't have any grief.
Ah,
And he kind of just chuckled.
yeah.
So we showed up for the first day of the seminar, and within an hour, I was like, oh my gosh, I have so much grief in my life because
Yeah.
before I thought it was related to death. And it is,
Hmm.
but there's so many more things that cause those feelings of grief inside of us, including, growing up with an alcoholic parent,
Hmm.
being in an abusive relationship, and just so many other things that happen in our life.
Welcome to the Becoming Sound podcast, where we dive into the tough stuff and try to find the humor in the hot mess of being an adult child. Join me as we peel back the layers on growing up in dysfunction, navigating substance abuse, mental health challenges, and everything in between. Hello. Today, my guest is Dawn Jackson. With 3 decades of nursing experience, Dawn combines her insight with her expertise as an advanced grief recovery method specialist and an infinite possibilities trainer to help women heal their hearts, transform their lives, and rediscover joy. During her nursing career, caring for a wide range of patients, she discovered the intricate connection between the mind and body. Her personal journey of healing led her to her mission to help others illuminate their light and transition from surviving to thriving. Dawn is also the best-selling author of 2 inspirational books, which we will dive into. So welcome, Dawn.
Thank you, Krista.
It's nice to have you. So, just start by telling me a little bit about your personal journey and what led you to do what you're doing and how your childhood impacted that.
Sure, I'd love to. So I was a nurse for about 30 years, but um, what I noticed is, especially earlier in my nursing career, I had all these kind of unresolved emotions that I didn't really know where they came from. And when I ended up getting a divorce at the age of 30, I started my own personal journey of healing. Because up until that time, I didn't really realize anything was wrong. But then when I was 30 years old and I had a 3-year-old son and I was alone, I started looking at my life and realized that I wasn't happy. I felt like something was wrong. I didn't know what it was. And so I started down my own road to personal growth work. And what I started to realize is that there were things in my childhood that I was carrying with me. I grew up in a home with a alcoholic father, and my parents were divorced at an early age, about the age of 3. But then my stepfather was also an alcoholic, and I just thought that the way that I was dealing with things and reacting was normal. But what I found later in life was that I was constantly doing things to keep the peace,
Mm.
be that child that didn't make waves, that just kind of kept to myself because I didn't want the situation to be worse than it was, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. I can relate right away as soon as you said keep being the little people pleaser, and that makes a lot of sense in an environment with an alcoholic for sure.
Yeah, and my when I was young, my mom and I actually moved to Idaho for a while, and my dad was still in Oregon. And I remember flying back to visit him a couple times a year, and he would leave me at the apartment and go out to the bars. And, I thought that was a little strange. And I didn't realize till later that, wow, that there's something there. Like, I only saw him a couple times a year, but he needed to go out to the bar. And, my heart hurt thinking about that because I felt alone and scared and I didn't really know what to do. Like he would call me and stuff, but I think I grew up with that feeling like why wasn't I good enough, right?
Hmm.
Why didn't he just want to spend the time with me versus going out to the bars to drink? And until I learned a little bit more about alcoholism as I did my own healing, I didn't realize, what an issue it was and why he was engaging in that behavior. But what
Mm-hmm.
happened over the years is that I developed a lot of anger. I was angry because I never felt important, you know, in his life because it was always the alcohol that was important. And I think you can probably relate to this, that it always feels like there's an unspoken rule, like don't talk about the problem that's
Yeah.
going on in the family. And my mom,
Yeah.
bless her heart, she never said don't discuss this. So I guess I was trying to think about this morning. I think some of it was my shame, right? These
Mm-hmm.
things were going on, and like I was always nervous about bringing my friends around, and I felt shame, I felt embarrassment, I felt sadness because I just wanted a dad that could be like other dads that didn't have this issue with alcohol, and I didn't have to worry that he might show up, having had a few too many.
Yeah.
So I went away from my childhood with a lot of that anger. And sadly, I carried that into my marriage. And
Mm-hmm.
before I got married, um, I ended up in a relationship that was not, it didn't honor me. It was
Mm-hmm.
abusive. And I think that's because I wanted the love from a man so much that, and
Yeah.
the attention, that I ended up in this type of situation. So
Yeah.
by the time I met my husband, I'd been with this other individual for about 7 years, sadly. And when my husband showed up, I really feel like he was kind of an angel that came in to take me out of that horrible situation that I had put myself in. And I didn't know how to get out of it. I just
Mm-hmm.
knew I was, getting the attention from a male that I hadn't had previously from my dad. But it
Yeah.
definitely wasn't helping me
Mm-hmm.
heal.
Yeah. And I think sometimes that when we're attracted to almost kind of a comfort zone, we don't have the tools because we just weren't taught that. We were taught to hide it, and the secrecy is a part of that. It's like don't talk about it, don't bring anything up. But
Right.
in that process, you lack learning
Mhm.
about how to deal with certain situations, how to protect yourself, how to feel safe. And so that perpetuates us in those relationships that are not healthy, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So, I can look back now and understand why my marriage failed because I was coming into this relationship completely unhealed. And, the anger and the sadness and all that was dumped into this brand new marriage. And my husband didn't really know what to do with it. And so, you know, by the time that I was 30 and we'd had our son, it was over because I hadn't healed and I didn't know how to navigate this relationship. And he was honestly tired of, dealing with the kind of emotions that I had and didn't know how to process, sadly. And, at
Yeah.
first I blamed him. It was another person leaving me, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I did all my work that I realized he actually did me a huge favor by leaving me because it was my chance to grow up. It was my chance to heal all those things that had hurt me, like the abusive relationship, the alcoholism in the family. Um, if he wouldn't have left, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. So I see it as a blessing, but
Mm-hmm.
it was a painful journey to go through to get to where I am today.
Yeah, sometimes the most painful journeys produce the best gifts
Yes.
and the most blessings. We don't see it when we're in the thick of it for sure.
No, we
And
don't.
no, but if you're able to grow and learn about yourself and you start developing some tools and some coping skills and awareness and understanding, that's
Mhm.
when the gifts start to appear.
Oh,
And
definitely.
yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. So tell me a little bit about what led you to starting, like, what was the first things you kind of did on your healing journey?
So, right after I ended up divorced, I was lost. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to afford the house. I don't know how to be a single parent. Um, and I started seeing a therapist who asked me, so tell me what brings you joy. Tell me what you like to do. I'm like, I don't know. I'm a nurse, I'm a mom, and I'm a wife. Like, I completely lost myself. And because I put so much into that relationship, because again, I was replacing what I didn't have from my own father with another man, or trying to, and get
Yeah.
those feelings like I was good enough and I was loved and I was important. So, since I was already a nurse, I decided to, instead of focusing on all my loss and sadness and grief, help someone else. So I decided to start doing mission trips to underdeveloped countries to help children.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would go on these surgical teams and we'd do surgery, and those would last for a week or two. So I really immersed myself in that. Um, until I realized, okay, well, I'm helping other people, but I'm still not helping myself. Like, this
Yeah.
is a distraction for me.
Yeah.
So after that, I started, attending personal growth seminars and workshops and, reading a lot of books, and they all helped a little bit. They all took the edge off, let's
Mm-hmm.
put it that way.
Yeah.
But I never really felt like all the pain that I had inside had healed. It was still there. It was just, I took the pressure off of the kettle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that
So,
makes so much sense. Wow. I didn't honestly think about it that way until you just said it, that I had done the same thing, a lot of workshops, a lot of personal development. And although it really helped me become aware and process things, I wasn't really addressing the underlying issues. And so you're
right.
right, it takes the pressure off and you feel better, but that those characteristics stick with you until you're really
Yes,
ready to dive in, you know?
that is
And
so true. I mean,
yeah,
I learned new ways to think,
yeah.
which did help. I learned, all the things I'm grateful for in my life, but that still didn't take away the pain. And what I
Yeah.
found is, and I'm sure you can relate to this, is I felt more comfortable, sadly, in chaos than calm.
Yes. so so true. Yeah. It's
And it was
comfort, it's your
all
comfort zone.
exactly. And
Yeah.
I even noticed I created chaos
Mm-hmm.
because that kept me comfortable.
Yeah. So
And
relatable.
it wasn't until I started my own healing that I realized, oh my gosh, I can't do chaos anymore. Like,
Yeah.
it's very, very uncomfortable because I've finally gotten out of that vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And I look back and I can see why so many things happened in my life, because I was stuck in that chaos and I
Yeah.
didn't know how to get out of it.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I remember for me, I was that as a young girl, I was very people pleasing and very like flying under the radar. You know,
Mhm.
don't do anything bad or quote bad. So to be detected, you know, just
Yes.
be good, be quiet, be sweet and kind, and that kind of come to an abrupt halt when I was a teenager. And I remember actually picking fights with my dad. Like if things were too calm, it was just weird for me, and I felt more alive when I was fighting with him, when I was
Yes.
creating that chaos. And that just continued into my early adulthood in my marriage, and exactly that, like you just feel that that's where the comfort lies.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
you feel alive. And
Yeah.
it's almost like, well, now I feel like I am a voice in this room versus,
Yes.
being that one that just kind of hides and doesn't want attention.
Mhm.
So, yeah, the chaos becomes that vicious cycle.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So, as I was doing all my personal growth workshops, etc., in 2015, I went to a seminar and I met my current partner.
Mhm.
And he had a loss in his life that he was having really a difficult time processing. And when I introduced him to my mom, she had told him and me at the same time about this program that she went through called the Grief Recovery Method. And he looked into it and he really wanted to do it. And so he calls me one day and says, I've signed us both up. And I'm like, what? You did what?
Yeah, welcome to your healing journey.
And we'd only been dating like a month,
Oh
right?
my. Pretty presumptuous, but maybe he had an insight that you didn't know about at the time.
Well, we did some really deep work in the workshop that we'd gone to
Yeah.
together. So we really connected in a magical way. And I
Hmm.
think that he knew,
Yeah.
that it would be helpful for me too. But it's kind of the joke because I said to him, well, why would you sign me up for that? Because I don't have any grief.
Ah.
And he kind of just chuckled.
Yeah.
So we showed up for the first day of the seminar, and within an hour, I was like, oh my gosh, I have so much grief in my life because
Yeah.
before I thought it was related to death. And it is,
Hmm.
but there's so many more things that cause those feelings of grief inside of us, including, growing up with an alcoholic parent,
Hmm.
being in an abusive relationship, and just so many other things that happen in our life.
Yeah, it's like we're grieving what we just didn't have. People have a
Yes.
hard time wrapping their heads around that, but you grieve the loss of a part of your childhood. You
Hmm.
grieve a loss of this safety and security that you should have had, that
Right.
you long for. So that's a huge part of grief. And it's not just about death, right? And I think a lot of people
No.
have a misconception about that too. So,
Yeah, they do. I really try and explain to people, we can have grief when we get married. We can have grief when we have a child because this is a change in our familiar patterns of
hmm,
behavior. We're giving things up, but also we're gaining something. The grief doesn't have to be just like a negative event happening in our life. It can also be a good event, but we're having those conflicting feelings.
hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So went through this program. It was a 4-day program and it was a certification program. We weren't just going through it for our own personal growth, we were going
Hmm.
through it to get certified to help others. So by
Nice.
the end, I, had a lot of eye-opening experiences realizing all the stuff that I'd carried around and how it had negatively affected my life.
Hmm.
So I was still a nurse, and I stayed in nursing till 2022. But as the pandemic happened, I was just watching, in the world, this significant grief that was happening. People were being feeling isolated. They were losing
Hmm.
people they loved. Their jobs were changing. So many different things, and I finally decided, nursing is not really for me anymore because I feel like we're missing something in the healthcare field.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, we're not looking at the grief that's leading to the health issues. I had so many patients with different health issues that are attributed to our emotional health, and it
Oh,
would affect their physical health.
yeah,
So
100%.
I, at that point, decided that it was really time for me because I'd done so much of my own work through the grief recovery method, and I felt like I really wanted to offer something back to others and to
Hmm.
help people thrive again versus just barely surviving because they had these experiences in their past that they didn't know how to process and they were just trying to, wade through the muck.
Hmm.
And that's when I decided to leave my career and do this full time.
Wow, yeah. Good for you. I mean, I have to agree. There's a lot missing in the healthcare field. It's
Mhm.
very science based, and I get that. And there's a place for everything for sure. But there's such a huge component to people suffering with physical ailments, and they are completely emotionally based. And when you're not addressing that emotional piece, or it's a separate entity, you go to the doctor, you go to the hospital for one thing, and then you have to go to a completely separate facility or a
Mhm.
completely separate practitioner or doctor for your mental stuff. It's like they're
Right.
just not cohesive with each other in the same place. So that a lot of things get missed. A lot,
Yeah.
a lot of a lot of yeah, a lot of people are suffering, and it's if you trace back, it will probably lead to some sort of emotional trauma, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I
Yeah,
love
most of
that.
us weren't taught when we were children because our parents didn't know either. They
No.
probably didn't have the tools to teach us how to deal with our emotional health. All of us are pretty much taught what to do if we fall and skin our knee. Something
Yeah.
physical happens to us. But most of us aren't taught what we do when we're sad. Oftentimes if we come home from school and, oh, so and so wasn't nice to me, well, here, let me take you out for an ice cream or have a cookie and you'll feel better. And it's a temporary fix for us as kids
Yeah.
because we like treats, but it's
Yeah.
not a long term fix. And we learn that instead of talking about our emotions and processing them, we just use something else to feel better.
Yeah. Some sort of substance, whether it's food or alcohol or drugs or whatever that may be. There's so much out there, but yeah, it's true that we learn that type of practice right from childhood. And especially
Yes.
if you grew up in the, any time before the 2000s for sure. And it's perpetual. So it just keeps going. And I love that we're talking about this now and educating other people, parents, and even teachers perhaps, that they can talk to kids about their feelings. And I see more and more of that in the world now, is actually talking about what they're experiencing, not just shutting it down with a cookie.
That's so important. I
Yeah.
mean, it really is. I wish I would have had this knowledge when my son was little. I mean, by the time I started doing all my healing, he was a teenager.
Yeah.
Um, so, now he notices the way that I talk to him and, encourage him to share his emotions. But I didn't have that when he was a young child. So
Yeah.
I think it's so important to teach that to parents.
It is, and I think that when you don't know what you don't know, and when you learn, you do better. And so, same thing. My kids are grown, but the way we interact is completely different now because of the healing that I've done, and it opens up the door for them to maybe do differently in their lives. So breaking the generational patterns of not talking about it. I think what you're doing and what I'm doing is so important in just for our own children, whether they be teenagers or adults. It's never too late, right? There's always a time to instill this different language in them and open communication. So that's really important. Yeah.
Yes,
Um,
definitely.
I want you to speak a little bit about, I mean, you treat a lot of women specifically, not maybe entirely. And I think as a mom, we come from this place of, aside from the childhood programming, as a mom and a woman, you come from, well, I need to take care of everyone else's needs, and just the feeling of having to do everything and be everything for everyone else can be overwhelming. So I know you address that a little bit in your practice and what you do. So you want to speak about that?
Yeah, so I started noticing in my practice, all the women I was working with, they all had a common theme, and they felt completely overwhelmed and burnt out because they
Mm-hmm.
were trying to be a mom and a lot of times a wife and maybe working an outside job and taking care of family. I think most of us as women, it's so ingrained in us. It's not that somebody told us we're supposed to do everything. It's like
No.
instinctually we feel like we're supposed to be the caregiver. We're always supposed to be there for everyone else, and so many times our needs get put last. And many of us either grew up hearing this or just developed this own belief from stuff we saw in society that self care is selfish.
Mm-hmm.
Taking that time away from someone else to take care of us, to go for a walk, to, you know, read a book, to take a nap, all that is selfish.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned over time how important it is. Like when I don't take care of me, I don't show up very well in my life for the people that I love because I am so burnt out. And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what happened with my nursing job. By the time I left it, I was sick all the time and I was miserable. So I live in this really beautiful area with the mountains and the trees. I didn't go out hiking. All I did was go to work and come home and just wanted to sleep. And so, because I wasn't caring for myself, I couldn't be there for other people in the way that I had wanted to be and be that light in the world. And so, I'm always encouraging women that it's really important to understand that by giving to yourself, you're giving back to others, to your
Mm-hmm.
family, to your community, to your friends. But it's a very difficult mind shift for most of us women to make because we do feel like we're supposed to be caring for everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds so cliche. I used to teach self-care seminars, and we always used to tell people, when they tell you on the plane to put your mask on first, there's a reason. Could you imagine if you're trying to help everyone else put their oxygen masks on and you're passed out? Like, what is that?
Right.
That's not going to help anybody. So, you want to save the person next to you or your child, perhaps. If that's the case, you really have to put your own oxygen on. Like,
Yes.
and that is so true. So yeah, it's hard to understand for moms, especially because it's just your job to take care of everything. But when you're trying to operate from an empty cup, it just doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. And, sadly, it's sometimes really hard for women to figure out how am I going to create that time in my day because, you know, I'm working and I need to get my kids to school and I need to pick them up and I need to make dinner. Like what one of those things am I going to give up so that I
Yeah.
can take care of me?
Mm-hmm.
And people often say, well, get up early. Well, some people need that extra sleep, right? And in the evening, when your kids go to bed, that's usually when you get that quiet time. So it's often really takes some finagling to figure out how I'm going to put that self care time into my day. And I always tell women, if you can only do 10 minutes, if you can have 10 minutes, I mean, that's not very much time, but just start small. You can
Yeah.
find 10 minutes. If you have to, lock yourself in the bathroom, and
Exactly.
just breathe. But
Yeah,
it's
go
so
lock
important.
yourself in the laundry room. No kid's gonna look there, I guarantee it.
That's so true, right?
Right? Find a place that the kids absolutely avoid at all costs and just go 10 minutes. You're right. It's so important. That 10 minutes leads to more, right?
It certainly does.
Yeah.
Yes. It's
Yeah.
important for the quality of our lives, really.
So if you could give someone just a couple tips on what they could do to just start doing in that 10 minutes, what would your advice be on that?
So, everyone's different. What helps them find their peace and their calm. But some of the things I like are, there's a lot of books out there that are like daily readers. In fact, I ended up writing one because it helped me so much during my divorce. Because when
Mhm.
people are stressed, when they're
Yeah.
grieving, they have a hard time focusing on anything.
Mhm.
They are not picking up information that they're reading like if they're trying to read a chapter. But one short paragraph or passage, that can be really helpful if it's inspirational. And that is one of the things I did right after I ended up divorced. I could focus on one thing that kind of
Mhm.
helped me, empowered me to move forward.
Yeah.
So
And
that's one of
what's
my suggestions.
what's the name? Is it The Journey to Self-Discovery? Is that
Yes.
your book? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
100 Days
awesome.
of Soulful Reflections.
Yeah.
And each one
Nice.
has an affirmation at the end as well. So it's
Mhm.
something that people can repeat. And, that helps them create the energy that they want in their day versus just being led by the world around them.
Yeah, I love that. I am a member of Al-Anon as well. I have an Al-Anon group and a community, and that's one thing I had never done in the past was daily readers, and I
Hmm.
mean they have a lot.
They
But
do.
there's always one little book, and I love that you made something like this. It's just a short little passage or
Hmm.
just a little, 30-second read. Even some of them are so short, but
Yes.
I mean, the message is powerful,
Hmm.
and it just gives you that moment to read it, breathe, think about, it's an awareness. So it's creating awareness for yourself every day, right?
Yeah,
So I
definitely.
love
That's
that.
exactly what I wanted to do, and to, also create some reflection for people to just kind of reflect on their own life, you know, allow them to just take a deep breath, to feel a little bit more empowered, and,
Yeah.
go about their day in maybe a different way, become more mindful as well.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Um,
Beautiful.
so that's one suggestion. The other suggestion I have is really, you know, we have a lot of noise around us all the time, most of us, and we can't all step out into nature, but we can listen to something that's peaceful and calming. And that's something I try to do every day. Like I just, click on YouTube, and there's just really calming sounds, nature sounds, that type of sound that really helps us get more centered and grounded. Or,
Mm-hmm.
and it calms the nervous system, because I think most of us that are women who feel burned out, overcommitted, overwhelmed, our nervous systems are absolutely shot,
Yep.
because, we've been functioning on a fight or flight mode. Our adrenaline's always kicking in, and eventually we just drop
Yep.
because we've been doing so much and haven't taken that time, made those moments to just pause and be
Yeah.
versus doing all the time.
Yeah, for sure. And getting our nervous systems out of that fight or flight, even if it's just for 5 minutes, can
Mm-hmm.
have a huge effect physiologically in your body.
Yes.
Like that just speaks volumes to healing what's going on inside you as well, not just your mental state,
Right.
but healing your actual physical body too, is getting out of that zone, and getting that cortisol to stop spiking all the time and causing so many problems. Yeah, we could have an entire hour conversation just on that.
We definitely could.
Yeah, for sure. So that's great. Just talk a little bit about your other book. You wrote a book called Journey to Peace and Healing.
I
What
did.
what
That
was
was
that about?
that was my first book, and
Mm-hmm.
I was writing it during the last year of my job as a nurse. And it was it was really helpful for me in, finding my way forward and empowering me to quit my job. I was just spent a lot of time reflecting on my life and where my passion was and what I wanted to do in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
what I realized was I really wanted to help people thrive again, because I felt for years like I was just barely getting by. I like I talked about that chaos. That's so easy to live in that chaos. And once I learned that it was actually more comfortable to, feel the peace and the calm, I started looking at all the tools that I had used over the years to help me become who I am today. And I really enjoyed writing. And one of my friends, who actually was my publisher of my books, said to me, "You need to keep writing." And I'm like, "No, I'm not a writer." And she's like, "No, I really love your writing." And so she encouraged me to write a book that could, be one that someone could pick up when they were going through a difficult time, whether
Mm-hmm.
it was a grieving event or they just felt stuck in life. And so I decided to write a book that would help others find some tools. There's a lot of reflective questions in my book, and even journaling space for people to look at their life and where they've been, where they are today, where they want to be, and some of the belief systems that are keeping them stuck.
Mm-hmm. Nice. It's like an interactive book. You can
Yes,
actually do the work with the readings. So that's
right.
awesome. Yeah, beautiful. And do you want to explain just a little bit about your practice, and what your practice looks like if a client was to call you and ask for help?
Yeah. So I do a couple things. I do lead women's retreats. I usually have a couple a year. And those, I really focus on helping women look at where they are, because the women come to me and they're in that phase of, like we talked about, overcommitted, overwhelmed, stuck. living with the belief systems that they've had almost their entire life, and they're not following through with their passions. They're not thriving. And so I lead like 2 to 3 day retreats where we are together for that whole time, and we look at all of those things and kind of help them discover, what's keeping them stuck and how they want to move forward in life. The other
Mm-hmm.
part of my practice is grief recovery. So people come to me. Normally, it's not because they just lost someone, it's because they're not happy.
Mm-hmm.
They have all these great things in life, but they're not happy and they can't figure out why.
Yeah.
And so the grief recovery method is actually the first evidence-based program for grief.
Mm-hmm.
And we are all around the world, we have specialists that help people through grief. It's a action-based tool that we use that has different steps. It's over like 6 to 7 sessions that I work with people, and I work with people online, actually mostly online versus in person.
Mm-hmm.
And we meet every week, and there's reading, there's writing work. It goes deep into, our childhood, deep into all the things that have happened in our life, looking at those different losses, and then looking at some of the individual ones and how they have affected our life. Because what happens with why we end up with grief is we have all these undelivered communications, all these
Mm-hmm.
things that we wish we would have said, we wish the other person would have said, we wish we would have done differently, we wish just had gone differently. And so that's what causes that pain. It's like growing up with an alcoholic parent. We wish it would have been different. We wish that relationship would have been stronger. We wish we would have felt important. All those things keep us in the grief and the pain and the anger. And so we help people through a process. And the really cool thing about it is, I love it because I went to a therapist for years, and while it touched the surface, it never got me to the healing that I have today. But this process, I take someone through it, and then I never need to see them again because they have these tools that they can use for the rest of their
Mm-hmm.
life.
Nice. Nice.
And they can obviously come back to me, but I feel good because I'm not keeping someone stuck coming to
Mm-hmm.
me for 10 years. They're actually getting some resolution and relief. We call it being complete
Yeah.
with, specific losses in their life.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I do believe in talk therapy as well. I've been to therapists myself, but there is something to be said for feeling like you're getting somewhere, like you're
Yeah.
getting results, And that's so crucial for healing. Yeah.
Oh, I definitely think it is. And,
Yeah.
one of the things we always talk about is like grievers need to feel heard.
Mm-hmm.
Because so often what happens when someone's hurting is they go to a friend or a family member and they start talking, and the person listening starts talking and says, oh yeah, I know, I felt that way when such and such happened, or you know says unhelpful things but from
Mm-hmm.
a well-meaning place.
Yes.
It's like someone losing a child. Well, you have other children,
Oh dear.
or you know I understand because my dog just died. Like all those comparisons and stuff end up shutting down the griever when they just really want to talk about how much their heart hurts and what they're
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah. It's like having a safe space to just know that you're going to be listened to. Just
Yeah,
know that you're going to be feel seen and heard, and that you're free to express however you want to express, and that you're not going to be shut down. So that's
exactly.
very important. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we call it being a listening heart. You're
Yeah.
there to really listen and to not give advice or, judgment or criticism, but just to listen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's a hard thing to do, because most of us have learned to respond. Most of us want to help someone and fix something,
Yeah.
but the emotional pain, nobody else can fix that for us.
Yeah. So true. I mean, I think we want to alleviate that person's suffering, you know, and that's
Yes.
not our job. And we don't realize that that's not our job. We think we're doing the best we can by, you know, offering a solution. And sometimes the solution is just to shut your mouth and listen,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So true. So true. It's a hard concept, especially
It
for
is.
moms and women, because
Mm-hmm.
we just fix things, you know. The kid comes
Yes.
with a banged up knee, we put a band-aid on it. We console them.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it becomes difficult in adulthood when we have a hard time with not wanting to fix the problems all the time.
Right.
You know, it comes off as controlling a lot of times, and understandably that can shut the other person down. You know, I've been
Oh,
in that
definitely.
situation. I've done that myself, and it's a difficult pattern to break until you really, really have an awareness. Yeah. So you have a great handout on your website called the 5 Principles of Emotional First Aid. I absolutely love this, and I love that how it's broken down. And I'm definitely going to post it in the show notes. You just want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I have my two books, but obviously, those are pretty lengthy, and I just wanted to write something that was like super quick for people to read that provided them just a little bit of comfort,
Mm-hmm.
when they were feeling completely overwhelmed, like some, step by step things to just look at. When I start with
Yeah,
the ABCs, and because I'm a nurse, we always do the ABCs: airway, breathing,
that's
circulation.
right.
And I think it's important that people stop and first assess, like, where am I at in life? What's going on that's causing these emotions in me?
Hmm.
And then breathe. Like, we forget to breathe. At least I
Yeah,
do. I
I'm
can't
guilty
tell
too.
how many doctors have said to me, you just really don't breathe very deep. You don't breathe
Hmm.
a lot. And
Yeah.
I think, really honestly, it's from things that have happened in my life, holding my breath. Because, like, what's going to
Hmm.
happen next? You know, growing up in an alcoholic home, things are unpredictable.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but most of my life I have not liked change because it's uncomfortable. Like, I
Yeah.
like to feel like it can predict something.
Yeah, definitely the prediction thing for sure. I think that I have always wanted to know what was going to happen, and
Yeah.
that is where a controlling tendency comes from. You think you can control everything, that everything will work out okay.
Hmm.
And that's not always the case, but I love what you said about the breathing, because until you really learn to breathe with your diaphragm, I
Hmm.
can't tell you, I've probably spent most of my life as a shallow breather, and I didn't understand what it was like to breathe with your belly. You know, really truly take a deep breath.
Hmm.
And it's so incredibly powerful. Breath is, I mean, is life, obviously, but it is so powerful just in taking a moment, just
Yes.
taking a breath. Intentional, you know?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why, when I talk about the 10 minutes, 10 minutes doesn't seem like a long time, but it can change the course of our day just taking the 10 minutes,
Yeah.
assessing where we are, breathing, and then choosing, making a choice how we want to proceed forward. Actually, my partner and I talk a lot about, we're always at choice. Like, if you're getting upset in a conversation, you can choose to pause
Mm-hmm.
and take those few minutes before responding instead of just reacting. And it completely changes the trajectory of the day of your conversation by just honoring what you're going through in the moment.
Yeah, it's so true. It's such a great point. Yeah, I love that. And I'm definitely going to put this in the show notes. And if people want to go onto your website and download that,
Oh, definitely. Thank you.
it's definitely a great little workbook. It's short. It's not a long drawn out thing. So if they just
Mhm.
want a little help right out of the gate, that's a great tool. So thank you for that.
Yes,
And
thank you.
I want to ask you one last thing before we close.
Hmm.
If you could give a piece of advice to someone out there who is struggling, who feels overwhelmed and overcommitted, what would you say?
Um, I would say, first of all, just be gentle with yourself. I think that we
Mm-hmm.
beat ourselves up a lot because we're trying to be everything for everyone, and then we can't be because we're burnt out. Be gentle with yourself. Understand that you also deserve the same love you give everyone else around you. And to just
Mm-hmm.
make that time, even if it just is the 10 minutes, because the 10 minutes next week can turn into 20 minutes. And as you see that your life is changing, you're going to want to make more time. You're going to
Mm-hmm.
realize how important it is. But to begin, it's hard. So be gentle, be
Yeah.
loving.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. That's beautiful.
Mhm.
And what have you got going on now? Do you have any retreats coming up, or is there anything that you'd like to promote, or?
I don't have any retreats coming up, but I will definitely have one in the spring. I just haven't planned it. I'm mainly
Okay.
working with my grief recovery clients and kind of working on the back end. My plan for 2025 is to start a podcast. So
Nice. Good for
yes.
you. That was my 2024 plan, so here we are.
Well, once I get it started, I will definitely contact you to be a guest.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, good for you. Well, I will post all of your links in the show notes, and if people want to get in contact with you, if they're interested in the services that you offer, highly recommended. And I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you very much, Krista, for having me on your show.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining me today on another episode of Becoming Sound. If this episode resonated with you in some way, please share it with someone you care about. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It helps to get this information out to more people who may need it. If you have a sec, I would love a follow on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. While you're there, hit the 5-star rating and give me a review. When you're scrolling, follow me on my social platforms, and I would love to hear your comments and feedback. Have a fabulous day, lots of love and gratitude from me. Please note, the views, information, and opinions expressed during the Becoming Sound podcast series are solely those of the individuals involved. The content of this podcast is to educate, inform, and for entertainment purposes only. This podcast series and the content presented does not constitute for medical or other professional advice or services. If you are in crisis or in need of help, please contact your medical or professional provider.